The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. Let me confess it at once. I am not mad. No, I swear by all that is holy, my senses are intact. Yet what I have done, what these hands have wrought, would make the devil himself shudder. You must understand, I was not always this way. As a child, I was known for my gentleness, so tender-hearted that even the cruelest boys mocked me for it. Animals loved me, and I loved them. My wife, too, and Pluto. Pluto, my black shadow, my silent companion. And now I sit in this cell, penning these words, not to beg forgiveness. No, I am beyond that, but to force the world to see the truth. Evil does not always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it wears yours. From my earliest infancy, I was noted for the docility and warmth of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these, I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and, in my manhood, I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. Our friendship lasted, in this manner, for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. The change in my nature accelerated with terrifying rapidity. What began as occasional outbursts of irritation soon solidified into a permanent state of malignity. My once tender heart had petrified into something unrecognizable, a blackened organ that pulsed with perverse desires. I took peculiar satisfaction in the suffering of my former pets, finding in their pain a distorted reflection of my own inner torment. The rabbits were the first to experience my newfound cruelty. I would seize them by their delicate ears, watching their pink eyes widen in terror as I swung them violently. Their pathetic twitching, their frantic attempts to escape, these sights fed something dark within me. The monkey, that clever mimic of human gestures, learned to cower at my approach. When it dared to bare its teeth at me one evening, I smashed its fingers with the fireplace poker, deriving immense pleasure from its human-like screams. But it was the dog's loyalty that provoked my most vicious impulses. Faithful creature that it was, it still wagged its tail when I entered the room, still licked my hand despite my previous abuses. This unconditional devotion became unbearable to me. One rainy afternoon, I took the beast to the cellar and methodically broke each of its legs with a shovel, marveling at how it continued to gaze at me with trusting eyes, even as its whimpers filled the damp air. Through all this, Pluto alone remained relatively unscathed, not from any mercy on my part, but because some lingering superstition stayed my hand. The cat's unblinking stare seemed to see through my corrupted soul, and this unsettled me in ways I couldn't articulate. Our relationship became a perverse game. I would starve him for days, then tempt him with morsels, only to snatch them away at the last moment. His growing skittishness both amused and enraged me. Then came that fateful night when the demon within me fully awakened. Returning home deep in my cups, I stumbled upon Pluto sleeping peacefully by the hearth. The sight of his contented slumber ignited an irrational fury. Seizing him roughly, I was met not with resistance, but with that same trusting purr that had once brought me comfort. This docility became the final provocation. "My friend," I slurred, drawing my penknife, "let us see how well you watch me now." The blade flashed in the firelight as I approached his golden eye. He didn't struggle, didn't even tense. It was this absolute surrender that made the act simultaneously exhilarating and profoundly dissatisfying. When the deed was done, and his ruined eye socket wept thick tears down his soot-black fur, I expected remorse. Instead, I felt only a curious emptiness, punctuated by brief flares of something like triumph. For several days following that atrocious act, a semblance of my former humanity returned. The sight of Pluto's mutilated face, the empty socket weeping viscous fluid, the once golden eye now a ruined crater of flesh, filled me with genuine horror at what I'd become. I avoided the cat's presence, unable to bear its silent accusation. My wife, though terrified of my violent moods, attempted to nurse the creature back to health. And for a brief period, I permitted this mercy. But as the wounds began to heal, so too did my fleeting remorse evaporate. The alcohol that had become my constant companion worked its poison anew, eroding what little conscience remained. Pluto's injury, far from inspiring pity, became instead a source of irritation to me. The cat's altered behavior, hissing when I approached, fleeing at my footsteps, offended my perverse sense of ownership. That which I had created through violence now dared to reject me. One fog-laden morning, when the gin burned particularly hot in my veins, I resolved to complete what I'd begun. Taking a length of rope from the stable, I fashioned a noose with deliberate care, my fingers trembling, not with guilt but excitement. Pluto, grown wary but not yet broken in spirit, resisted when I seized him, scratching deep furrows in my forearm. The pain only heightened my determination. "Traitorous beast!" I roared, dragging him toward the ancient oak in our garden. "You'll learn your master's will." The noose tightened around his neck as I hoisted him aloft, His struggles were brief but violent, claws raking air, body contorting in primal terror. Then came that terrible moment when life departed, leaving only a limp, swinging corpse, with one golden eye staring eternally at nothing. Even in my drunken state, the finality of my action struck me. As I stood beneath that ghastly pendulum, watching sunlight filter through the leaves to dapple Pluto's stiffening form, a cold realization crept upon me. I had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The deed was done not in rage, but with cold calculation, and this knowledge terrified me more than any supernatural vengeance could. That night, our house burned to the ground. When the flames subsided, only one wall remained standing, and upon its smoke-blackened surface, the image of a gigantic cat with a rope about its neck stood out in ghastly relief. The crowd gathered to witness the spectacle murmured of witchcraft, but I knew better. This was no demon's work, but the manifestation of my own rotting soul. The fire had reduced my home to smoldering ruins, leaving only a single wall standing, a grotesque monument to my sins. As I staggered through the wreckage, my blood turned to ice at the sight before me. There, upon the smoke-stained plaster, was the unmistakable silhouette of a gigantic cat, its neck encircled by a rope, its single remaining eye gleaming in the dim light. The image was not painted, nor was it carved. It had formed naturally from the soot and ash, as though the flames themselves had conspired to brand my crime upon the ruins. I recoiled in horror, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cat's hollow socket seemed to stare directly into my soul, accusing me, mocking me. The townsfolk whispered of witchcraft, but I knew the truth. This was no trick of nature. It was a judgment, a spectral imprint of my own cruelty. I tried to flee, but the image haunted me, burned into my mind like a brand. For weeks, I avoided the ruins, drowning my terror in drink. Yet, the memory of that ghastly silhouette tormented me. Sleep brought no relief, only nightmares of a black cat, its ember-like eye watching me from the shadows, its phantom claws raking at my conscience. I became a hollow man, my once proud demeanor reduced to shivering paranoia. Then, one evening in a dingy tavern, I saw him. Perched upon a barrel of ale was a black cat, nearly identical to Pluto in size and shape, save for one chilling distinction. Upon his chest was a splotch of white fur, shaped unmistakably like a gallows. My hands trembled around my glass. The creature turned its head, fixing me with its yellow eyes, and to my horror, I saw that one of them was missing, a scarred, sunken void where an eye should have been. The cat did not hiss, it did not flee, it merely stared, as though it had been waiting for me. Driven by some perverse impulse, perhaps the jinn clouding my reason, or the eerie resemblance to my murdered Pluto, I reached out and scratched its head. To my astonishment, it arched its back in pleasure, purring like a contented demon. The bartender chuckled. "That beast has been haunting this place for weeks. Won't let anyone touch it until you." A cold sweat broke over me, yet I could not resist. I lifted the creature into my arms, its weight identical to Pluto's, its single golden eye boring into mine. "I'll take him," I muttered, tossing coins onto the bar. At home, my wife recoiled at the sight of the animal. "It looks just like—" "Don't say his name," I snapped, though I knew she meant Pluto. The new cat explored the house with unsettling familiarity, as if it had lived there before. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt its warmth against my legs. But when I reached down, my fingers brushed something wet. Candlelight revealed the white fur on its chest had changed. No longer a shapeless blotch, but a distinct pattern, a gallows, rope and all. The gallows mark upon the creature's breast became my private torment. Each morning, I would examine it with morbid fascination, tracing the white ropes with trembling fingers, only to recoil in horror at their increasing definition. The cat, meanwhile, seemed to grow more affectionate by the day, a perverse mockery of Pluto's former devotion. Where I walked, it followed. Where I sat, it coiled about my ankles like a living shackle. Its purring, once barely audible, now vibrated through my skull like the drone of an executioner's saw. I could no longer distinguish its presence from my own thoughts. Its weight upon my chest at night, its ragged breath against my neck, the way its single golden eye followed me like a curse. Then came the morning when I made the discovery that shattered what little sanity remained. As the beast stretched lazily in a patch of sunlight, I noticed something unnatural about its face. The left eye, which I had always assumed was merely half-lidded in its usual smug contentment, was in fact missing. Not wounded, not scarred, but gone, as though it had never existed, the lid sewn shut over an empty socket. My breath caught in my throat. This was no coincidence. This was the same mutilation I had inflicted upon Pluto. The cat turned its head, fixing me with its remaining eye, and in that moment I understood. It knew. It remembered. From then on, the creature's behavior grew intolerable. Where once it had merely followed me, now it pursued me, rubbing against my legs with unnatural insistence, climbing into my lap at meals so that I could scarcely lift a fork without touching its matted fur. Worse still was its silence. It never mewed, never hissed. Its communication was purely physical. A nudge of its cold nose against my hand, a deliberate press of its maimed face against my knee, as if to say, "You did this. You will not escape me." At night, the torment worsened. I would wake to find it perched on my pillow, its breath reeking of gin, though I swore I never gave it any, its single eye gleaming in the dark like a dying ember. Once, in a fit of rage, I seized it by the throat and flung it against the wall. It landed soundlessly, then immediately slunk back to me, purring as though my violence were a perverse form of affection. My wife, poor witless creature, only fed its malevolence. "He loves you," she would say, stroking its head as it coiled around her ankles. "Can't you see?" Loves me? The thought was unbearable. This was no love. This was an executioner's patient vigil. The white gallows on its breast seemed to grow more defined each day, the ropes tightening around my neck with every passing hour. It was in this state of suffocating dread that I descended into the cellar one fateful evening, the cat slinking at my heels like a shadow given form. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and spoiled preserves, the only light coming from a single flickering lantern that cast monstrous shapes upon the walls. I had come to fetch a cask of wine, or so I told myself, but in truth, I sought escape from that accursed creature's gaze. No sooner had I set foot on the earthen floor than the cat darted between my legs with deliberate malice. I stumbled forward, my shoulder striking the rough stone wall as the lantern slipped from my grasp. The glass shattered, plunging us into near darkness, save for the guttering wick's dying glow. In that hellish half-light, I saw the beast crouched before me, its single eye reflecting the flame like a malevolent star. Something within me snapped. The hatchet. Why had I brought the hatchet? I could not recall grasping it, yet there it was in my hand, its weight both foreign and familiar. The cat did not flee, it merely tilted its head, as if curious to see what I would do next. I raised the blade. "Stop!" My wife's voice pierced the gloom as she rushed down the stairs, her face pale with terror. "For God's sake, it's just an animal." Her intervention broke the spell. The cat vanished into the shadows, but my fury now had a new target. How dare she defend this fiend? How dare she judge me? The hatchet moved as if of its own volition. There was a wet thud, a choked gasp, and suddenly she was crumpled at my feet, her unblinking eyes wide with betrayal. Silence, then a sound. A soft, padding footstep. The cat emerged from the darkness and began to circle the body, its tail twitching. To my horror, it paused to lick the blood pooling beneath her head, its pink tongue darting out with grotesque delicacy. A wave of nausea overtook me. This was no ordinary beast. It had orchestrated this. It had wanted me to see. I acted with a clarity that bordered on madness. The cellar walls were old, their mortar crumbling. Working feverishly by the lantern's fading light, I pried loose the stones near the foundation and hollowed out a space just large enough to accommodate her. I folded her limbs with a tenderness I hadn't known I still possessed, as if arranging a sleeping child. Then I rebuilt the wall, brick by brick, my hands steady despite the sweat pouring down my face. The cat observed everything. By dawn, the deed was done. No trace remained, no blood, no disturbance, save for the freshly mortared stones that looked no different from the rest. Exhaustion weighed upon me, but also a perverse pride. I had outwitted fate itself. Then I realized the cat was gone. I searched every corner of the house, even the streets outside, but it had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. For 3 days, I waited for the inevitable knock of the constable, for the walls to weep blood, for my wife's ghost to come scratching at the windows. Nothing happened. On the 4th day, the police came, not for me, but to inquire after my missing wife. I welcomed them with open arms, even leading them on a tour of the cellar. As I expounded on her possible elopement, I leaned casually against the very wall that entombed her, even rapping it with my knuckles to emphasize some trivial point. Then, faint but unmistakable, a sound from within the wall, a muffled, mewling cry. The officers froze. My blood turned to ice. The cat. The damned cat had been sealed inside all along. The muffled cry from within the wall struck me like a physical blow. The officers, their faces draining of color, turned to me with expressions that mingled disbelief and dawning horror. I attempted to laugh, a dry, brittle sound that crumbled in the stale cellar air. "Rats," I croaked. "The place is infested with them." But even as the words left my lips, the sound intensified, no longer a mere whimper, but a full-throated yowl that reverberated through the stones, a sound too large, too resonant to belong to any ordinary creature. The wall itself seemed to pulse with it. One of the constables staggered back, crossing himself. The other, a man with the weary eyes of someone who has seen too much evil, drew his truncheon and advanced on the wall. I could only watch, paralyzed, as he pressed his ear to the mortar. The yowling ceased abruptly. Then, God help me, a new sound emerged. The slow, deliberate scrape of claws against brick, as if something were digging its way out. The constable recoiled. "There's something alive in there." They tore at the wall with bare hands, their nails splitting against the rough stone. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. Yet some perverse fascination rooted me to the spot as the first brick came loose, then the next, and the next, until a gaping hole yawned in the wall, exhaling a breath of putrid air. The stench hit us like a fist, the sweet, cloying reek of decay mingled with something sharper, something chemical and wrong. The officers gagged, but their lanterns illuminated the horror within. My wife's corpse, barely recognizable after days in the damp, her face frozen in a rictus of terror. And there, perched upon her lifeless head like a grotesque crown, sat the black cat, its single golden eye blazing with triumph, its white-furred gallows now perfectly formed upon its breast. It opened its mouth, and what emerged was neither mewl nor scream, but a sound no earthly creature should produce. A guttural, chittering noise that seemed to echo from the depths of some infernal pit. The constables collapsed to their knees, retching. The cat leapt gracefully from its grisly perch and landed at my feet, rubbing against my legs as it had done so many times before. I understood then the full depth of my damnation. This was no animal. It had never been an animal. It was a vessel, an instrument of divine retribution, sent to guide me, step by step, to this moment of absolute revelation. Every act of cruelty, every drop of spilled blood, every lie I had whispered to myself in the dark had led inexorably here, to a crumbling cellar where justice, long delayed, now stared at me with a cat's unblinking eye. The officers seized me, their grips bruising, but I barely felt it. As they dragged me into the light, the cat followed, its purr a mockery of comfort. At the threshold, it paused, casting one final glance over its shoulder at the ruined wall, the exposed corpse, the shattered remnants of my life. Then it vanished into the shadows, not with the slinking gait of a feline, but with the deliberate stride of an executioner departing a completed task. The Black Cat is a chilling masterpiece by Edgar Allan Poe, one of America's most iconic writers of Gothic horror and psychological thrillers. Born in 1809, Poe pioneered the short story form and is celebrated for his macabre tales, including The Telltale Heart and The Raven. His works explore themes of guilt, madness, and the supernatural, just like the haunting story you've listened to today. If you enjoyed this descent into darkness, hit that subscribe button. For more classic horror audiobooks, deep dives into Gothic literature, and eerie tales that will keep you up at night. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What tale should we narrate next? Let us know in the comments below.